Welcome to the Everybody Matters podcast, a show dedicated to the idea that when organizations care enough to show their people that who they are and what they do matter, they unlock the only business idea with truly unlimited potential. I'm Brent Stewart, your host. This podcast is an outreach of Barry-Wehmiller. Don't forget to connect with us on the web at BarryWehmiller.com, on Twitter at BarryWehmiller, on Facebook and LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. How do we ensure that the culture of truly human leadership we've cultivated lasts for generations to come? That was CEO Bob Chapman's response when a team member questioned him about his greatest fear. And what was our solution? To transform our emerging people-centric culture into an enduring ethos through a continuous learning program that teaches the principles of truly human leadership. Through BarryWehmiller University, we are able to deeply connect our people to our vision and equip them with the skills, behaviors, and attitudes needed to motivate themselves and inspire others. Through this, we grow and sustain our leadership vision throughout our global organization. One of the architects of the curriculum of BarryWehmiller University is David Vandermolen. David is our learning sensei at BWU and has played a critical role in articulating our beliefs, shaping our culture, and helping people become better leaders. Anyone who has ever had a class with David always remembers his unique sense of humor and his candid and entertaining way of teaching. David is currently working on a book for frontline leaders and would-be leaders from his 30-plus years of personal experience in leadership and behavior change. And on this week's Everybody Matters podcast, we talked to David about a topic he's been thinking about a lot lately: the shape of leadership. And what kind of shape are you in as a leader? If you're looking for a few tips on how to get into better shape, here's David Vandermolen.
When you're in leadership, exposed to leadership, when you are, in a sense, if I use traditional nomenclature, under a leader, you get a sense over time that people express their leadership in a very particular way. It's distinctive, in the sense that leadership is not generic, right? Like it's not a soda pop. It's a particular kind of cola. And it has its own ingredients, its own flavor, its own texture and taste, so to speak. Leadership is very much like that. And so over the years, I've accrued a way of looking at how leaders move out, engage with others, think about their role. You observe the work that they do, and it becomes pretty apparent over time that everyone's leadership takes shape. And so I began, to kind of work the model, and there's research out there that would verify that there are predominantly three ways that people move out into the world and lead. There are three shapes that leadership takes. The first and most popular shape is a triangle, base at the bottom, apex at the top, and that is where the leader sits. It's traditionally referred to as the top-down shape of leadership. With this particular model, the leader, he's moving through the world, and this is what he or she says to herself, mostly inside the inner voice, not out loud in public, but it goes something like this: I am your leader, you work for me. And so this top-down shape to leadership is actually the most pervasive shape about historically, geographically, generationally. The top-down shape to leadership is common. It's pandemic. It's everywhere. The second shape is, it's a better shape to a certain extent, because this shape is a rectangle, if you can envision that. The arrow within this rectangle runs left to right. And if I were to give you a phrase or the mantra this leader would say, who has the shape of this rectangle, it goes something like this: I am your leader, I work with you. And there's something about that seems very appealing, very attractive, appropriate, or better, one might say. Yet it actually isn't ideal either. And here's why. If the leader takes this shape to their leadership as they're moving out into the world, the tendency is that they create an environment around them in which people are asking this one critical question. Who's leading? And it tends to create, or people feel, a degree of confusion because they're not exactly sure who's leading. And so that's our second shape to leadership. It's traditionally referred to as the transactional shape. In some ways, it's I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine. It's more about the pursuit of the relationship between the leader and those in his or her span of care than it is about the relationship that the leader has to lead. And there's a third shape. And by the way, this shape is not very common at all. The third shape is, imagine a triangle, upside down, so to speak, with the pointy end on the bottom and the broad end facing up. And in this shape, the leader's at the bottom. And his arrow goes from the bottom of that triangle, the pointy end, so to speak, up to the base. This is referred to as the transformative or transformational model of leadership or shape of leadership. When you think about it, this is an amazing kind of approach or shape to one's leadership. This leader kind of moves through the world and, well, when he or she rolls into the parking lot of work, pulls the keys out of the ignition of her vehicle and begins to make her way from her vehicle to the building, this mantra is running through her head, this thinking. It goes something like this: I am your leader. I work for you. And so if you think about it, three shapes: the transformational shape, the transactional shape, that rectangle, and then the top-down shape, that traditional kind of military hierarchy. Most leaders are moving through the world in one of those three shapes. Generally speaking, people start their leadership career taking that top-down shape to their leadership. And they do so because it's that greatest motivational principle in the world, right? Monkey see, monkey do. If they realize in time that this is not the most effective long-term way to shape their leadership, they'll migrate from that top-down shape to leadership to that rectangle shape to leadership, and they'll stay there for a while. But ultimately, that's not where you want to go. You want to get really to that transformational shape, the upside-down triangle. And by the way, when you're in your leadership is representative of that transformative state, that upside-down triangle of stewarding the lives entrusted to you, people get carried away. People feel connected. And in many ways, the men and women in your span of care, when the leader is thinking about himself, his work, his roles, and the people in his span of care, when that leader has that transformative shape to his leadership, people will charge hell with a squirt gun for you. Because they understand you're there to serve them. You're there to support them. You're there to empower them. I'm your leader. I work for you. And that whole mindset makes its way from the leader right through the organization. It's called a clear line of sight and a clear line of service. And by the way, this isn't just great for, I'll call it, the personal or people side of a business or of a leadership environment. It's exceptionally good for performance because everyone understands who the customer is. Everyone's facing the same direction and everyone's focused on the next person in line to serve and care for. It's exceptional for business performance and, creating powerful results. And it creates just the right kind of relational dynamic that people are craving for in our modern era. To have a leader who's waking up in the morning, rolling out of bed, driving into work, entering the organization with a mindset that says, I am your leader. I work for you. That's huge. It is transformative. And this all began, years ago. But I've seen, personal evidence in my own life of this. And I've watched the shape of leadership take shape in many leaders' lives.
Could you differentiate a little bit more between the transactional and the transformative shapes of leadership? Kind of dig in a little bit more into those differences, because I think people could maybe get confused when they think, what's the difference between we work together and I work for you? Isn't we working together a good thing?
On the surface, it appears to be. And it does have many positive attributes. However, it's more of a transactional relationship. And one of the things that happens is the people who are in a leader's care where they're operating out of that transactional mindset, they tend to experience a tremendous amount of confusion because they're repetitively asking the question, who's leading? And again, it's better, right? It's way better than the top-down approach. But it leaves often a vacuum of leadership because it's kind of flat, such that it's hard to know who is on point, who's accountable, who's there to drive results, who's there to care for the team.
Whereas with the transformative, that leader who is working for them is responsible for their success and for their failure, in a sense.
Yeah. Well, look at it from this perspective, right? What's a common way in which people a leader describes, I'll call it his or her workforce. They often use phrases like, these are my direct reports. These are my subordinates. It's interesting how language has such a powerful effect on how you actually move out in your leadership. If I perceive an employee within my organization as a subordinate to me, it implies a hierarchy of relationship, and it implies that I am over them and they are under me. And I don't know if you're like me, but I never went through college. I never went invested my time, effort, and energy building a career so I could one day be referred to as someone's direct report. Even the nature of that phrase is, it's incredibly limited. It's about a reporting relationship, not about an empowerment relationship. It's very different. So, that top-down approach, you often hear leaders refer to the people in their organization of, this is my span of control. In the bottom-up approach, the inverted triangle and the transformative way of leadership, it's span of care. And when you shift from control to care, that subtle change of just a few letters of the alphabet make a significant difference in how a leader shapes everyone in his or her span of care. Because it's true that the shape of my leadership shapes everything. And the shape of every leader shapes everything around them.
I would imagine this is a sort of, when people come to this realization, it has to be a little uncomfortable ultimately very empowering for the team, but at first uncomfortable for everybody, because I think those who are being led, it's a totally different experience for them. And they often would look to their leaders to get an answer, whereas in this particular situation, it's not the role of the leader to get the answers, right? It's the role of the leader to sort of help remove the barriers so they can get the answers.
Yeah, absolutely. It's in some ways the prisoner dilemma. And what I mean by that is this. One of the things that happens when someone has been incarcerated for years and then they are released back into modern society, there's an incredible challenge that they have of adjusting from being in an environment in which they went years never even opening their own door. And now they're in an environment where they have, in a sense, a radical amount of freedom. They can open doors, they can go to a fast food restaurant, they can go watch a movie, they can pursue employment, they can ride a bus. They went from confinement to freedom. There's a parallel in the workplace where if most of the people in my span of care are accustomed to being in an environment where the leader is in control, that top-down approach, and they make the decisions, they're setting the direction, and they're the one in power. If I've been groomed and, in a sense, raised in that kind of environment, when I'm introduced to an environment that's just the opposite, I'm your leader, I'm here to work for you, and the leader's focusing on empowering the people in the span of care, there's a shock to your system. I don't know what it's like to function in this kind of environment. It's very different. And so, yeah, initially, and that initial uneasiness or awkwardness or feeling it out happens on with the leader and with those in his or her span of care. It's a pretty powerful dynamic. In many ways, when that transition occurs on the front end of the process, it actually doesn't improve performance. Performance will degrade, but in time that will shift. It'll begin to kind of trend north. I think another really important aspect here is that it's incredibly difficult to empower, obviously a code word used everywhere today in our culture of leadership and the popular pop genre of leadership. Empowerment and empowering people it's everywhere. Yet it's just wildly misunderstood. The trend is to see empowerment is I am drawing the potential out of this person. I'm empowering them. I'm going to draw their potential out of them. But that's only one side of the coin. There's two sides to this coin of empowerment. One side is, in fact, that whole idea of drawing out the potential of those in my span of care. I want to leverage and utilize their gifts, their talents, their abilities. But there's another side, and this is why empowerment doesn't work very often. It's because we don't, or leaders don't address the other side of empowerment. And that's this idea of giving your power away. If I'm going to empower people in my span of care, and I'm going to assume the inverted triangle, the transformative approach to leadership, one of the biggest challenges I have is once I get my head right, once I get my thinking clear, right, because how I think is how I lead, the shape of my leadership shapes everything. Once I've got that mindset or redefine that paradigm, my biggest hurdle then is to give away all my power. And leaders are some of the first people to be, they hold their power close to their chest. They know things others do not know. They have experience that others do not have. They have technical prowess in a particular area. They have expertise. And many times we hold on to our power as leaders. We don't give it away to those in our span of care. And when we do, when we hoard our power, we can't, help others by empowering. It begins with me as a leader. What's that song? Give it away, give it away, give it away. I've got to give away my power.
So give me a real world example of that, David. Giving away power, a leader giving away power.
I can give a personal story of how that occurred with me. About 11 years ago, I had the opportunity to work and come on board alongside of many in the people team here at Barry-Wehmiller. I crafted a course. We launched it. It was incredibly fortunate that it began to take its own life. It began to really grow like wildfire. The challenge was, at that time, I think our organization was about 4,500 people worldwide. And at the pace that we could actually bring people through the course, it would take, something like 35 years to get that group, just 4,000 people, through the course. It's a big course. It's 3 days. And you just can't do it week after week after week. So I remember very clearly the conversation I had with Rhonda Spencer. She looked at me and said, David, you're going to need to teach people, other professors, to teach this course. And I'll be honest with you, you might think my initial reaction was, that sounds exciting. I can't wait to do that. It was not. I had a typical response that most people do when confronted with the decision to empower or not. I was actually terrified. I was fairly new to the organization. I had just launched this class. And my fear, my thought process was this: if I give away all of my skills, abilities, talents, experience in in-class facilitation, once I've given all that away, I'm not going to be needed here anymore. I might as well pack my bags and leave. And I remember facing my own fears with giving away the power that I had. And it took me some time to process that. And thankfully, my leader, Rhonda, was able to give me that grace and space to kind of sort that out. And over time now, I've had the opportunity to give it all away. And I'll tell you, initially it was terrifying. This idea of giving others everything you know about a particular component of your work or the 10,000 plus hours of in-field experience, to give all that away. And yet today, I can sit in the back of a room in Chennai, India, and observe a professor teach a course and teach it as good or better than I can teach it, because I gave it all away 11 years ago. And that's moving to me and powerful. Initially terrifying. But as I look at, what's occurred over the years, it's incredibly gratifying to have built a legacy of giving away power, giving away knowledge and experience, of a legacy rooted in the whole concept of empowering.
Usually when it comes to physical fitness, before you start your new workout regimen at the beginning of the year, there's kind of a fitness assessment. And it almost sounds like when you're talking to a leader and you're wanting them to kind of think about these things, about the shape of their leadership, what's a way that they can start to assess themselves? What's the fitness assessment for the shape of leadership?
Well, I would say it first begins with mindset. So if you were to put your thinking on a continuum, one side is I am your leader, you work for me. And the other side of the continuum is I am your leader, I work for you. And everyone on planet Earth who is in a leadership role is on one extreme of that or somewhere in the middle. In the sense of, what is your prevailing thoughts? What is your predominant approach as you enter into wherever your span of care is and move out and lead? I think there's a second metric one can use, and it goes back to this idea of what are you doing with your calendar and with your clock. Here's what I mean. If the average leader works 40, 50, 60 hours a week, what are you doing in the time that you're investing in the workplace? What's your work? And one way to kind of assess this is to recognize that the work of a leader, there are really three big parts, pieces, so to speak, to the work that a leader does. And let me be clear, much like a carpenter, their work is rather clearly defined, and like a cobbler, what they do, they repair shoes, they polish and fix, shoes and zippers. If I were to say, what does a welder do? Their work is pretty self-explanatory. They take, a welding machine, welding rods, and they melt metal together, right? It's not difficult to get close to what the actual work is. But if I were to say to you, what is the work of a leader? Now you got people going, to lead. And it becomes very mushy. It gets really sketchy because leadership and its work it's rather difficult or undefined in our culture today. When you think of the model of the transformative leader, though, his work is crystal clear. It centers around three basic things: to know and grow self. In the event of a loss of cabin pressure, put the mask on yourself first, right? So leadership, knowing and growing self, it begins there. The self-care, the development and growth of my own leadership, I start there. It then moves to know and grow the people in my span of care. And that's the actual, I am intentional about growing everyone in my span of care. I'm focused on helping them leverage their full potential. I am working to give away my power and to draw out their potential. I'm stepping into the roles of leadership. I'm putting on the hat of being a student, the hat of being a teacher. I'm moving out to be a coach, a mentor, and to provide a vision for them and for the organization. Is if I'm wearing the right hats and I'm doing the work of knowing and growing self and knowing and growing my people, there's one more piece: I know and grow the business. And if I were to give a metric for assessing where one is in terms of their shape of leadership, understanding what you're doing with the clock and the calendar is a pretty strong indicator. Because if leadership and your work is knowing and growing self, knowing and growing your people, and knowing and growing the business, what most leaders actually spend the bulk of their time doing is fighting fires. If you break down the hours in the 50-hour work week, track them on a video camera for a week, and see where you're investing your time, your effort, and energy, a lot of it is in a lot of important activity, but it's not the actual work of a leader. So there's another metric you can look at. I would start with there. That's quite a lot.
So then, to kind of tie everything together, and if a leader says to you, okay, what can I do now to change the shape of my leadership going into this new year, what would you say to them?
I love the question. And by the way, I'm going to give an answer that is 100% accurate, but it is highly suspicious. Here's the answer. I would say reflect more. So the speed of business in a global environment of performance and, key performance indicators and metrics that push people, to the edge of the envelope, most leaders are in the left-hand lane, if you're in the United States, and they're not in the right-hand lane. They're moving hard and fast in the passing lane, and they're not in the right-hand lane of their leadership life. When you're in the right-hand lane, you have time to think. And so what most of us need to be able to make significant changes in our behavior, and by the way, moving from the top-down shape of leadership to the transformative shape of leadership, moving from the top-down shape of leadership to the transformative shape of leadership, that's a huge shift in behavior. To make that big jump, it requires to dig deep and to draw out those ideas and the thinking that's new. If I'm in the left-hand lane and I'm moving at the speed of business, so to speak, and moving hard and fast, I don't take time to think about my next expression of leadership. I don't take time to think, is this truly, I'm your leader, I'm working for you? I don't take time to think about how I'm going to populate and blow out my calendar. And so what I will do is I'll do what I did last week and the week before and last month and last year and in my last job. I'll continue doing what I've always done. The habit breaker is to exercise the power to pause and reflect. Exercising the power to pause and reflect is huge because it gives me bandwidth, mental and emotional and physical space to decide what is going to be my next expression of leadership. And again, it's 100% accurate, but highly suspicious that reflection has that much power. But it's a keystone condition of change. I don't make significant change in my life unless I carve out significant time to reflect, to think before I behave. Because again, it goes back to a very simple notion. How you think is how you lead.
If you'd like to find out more about how to get your leadership in better shape, you might check out the BW Leadership Institute, which is the way we partner with businesses to bring our culture of truly human leadership to other companies. You can find them at bwleadershipinstitute.com. If you'd like to find out more about Bob Chapman and Raj Sisodia's book, Everybody Matters: The Extraordinary Power of Caring for Your People Like Family, go to everybodymattersbook.com. For updates on the book, this podcast, and for a lot of great content and insight, don't forget to connect with us on the web at BarryWehmiller.com, on Twitter at BarryWehmiller, on Facebook, LinkedIn, and check out our blog, trulyhumanleadership.com. I'm Brent Stewart. Thanks for listening. And remember, Everybody Matters is the only business idea with truly unlimited potential.